Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the work of Innocence Canada in exonerating wrongfully convicted people. Ron, what are some of the biggest challenges in getting convictions overturned in cases of wrongful convictions?
In many of the cases that we look at, time is one of the biggest challenges. We've had cases go back, starting with the Stephen Truscott case, that went back 48 years when we were working on it. You don't have the disclosure from the old days. Most exhibits have been destroyed. Witnesses, individuals who are involved in the case are no longer living. So time is a big problem going back. But the Crown culture, our lead lawyer tends to refer to that quite often. At one time, the Crown, the police, and the Crown prosecutors were not in the habit of sharing the information they had with the accused person, and that's gradually changed as our charter came into force in the 80s, and for the last 25 years it's been getting better. But we're still challenged with that when we go back to look at older cases.
Now, that case you mentioned, Stephen Truscott, that's a name some Canadians might be familiar with. It's a very famous case of wrongful conviction and miscarriage of justice. Can you give us at a high level a description of what happened in that case?
Stephen Truscott was 14 years old in 1959 when he was convicted for the murder of his 12-year-old classmate. He was sentenced to hang for that crime, and the only reason he didn't is the public, and largely women across the country, started writing the Prime Minister and the federal cabinet saying you can't hang a 14-year-old no matter what he may have done. They didn't question the veracity of his conviction and whether he was guilty of this homicide. They just made a political decision that it wasn't a good idea to hang a 14-year-old kid. And he served 10 years in prison. He was on parole for another 35 years before we started working on his case. He got married, raised a family, and eventually we were able to prove his innocence, and he was acquitted 48 or 49 years after the fact. But that was a case that was a stain on the collective conscience of our country. We almost hung an innocent 14-year-old child.
And if I'm not mistaken, his case was pivotal in Canada getting rid of the death penalty. Is that right?
It was certainly discussed at the time. We didn't get rid of the death penalty until 1976, and there was a lot of discussion around his case. But he was still considered guilty at the time. They just used it as an example of what a harsh punishment it would be to sentence a 14-year-old child to hang.
And did they ever find who had committed the crime in his case?
They had a couple of good suspects, but 50 years after the fact, the best suspects were no longer alive. Most of the witnesses weren't, so it's still an unsolved crime. We do know that Stephen Truscott was innocent, but we were never able to identify the actual perpetrator.
And went on to play a very productive role in society and have a family and a job.
He certainly did, yeah. Very, very patriotic gentleman, actually. Very, very inspiring. It's a story that all Canadians should know. And I can remember reading a book about it when I was 14 or 15 years old, which was a few years ago. And my mother, we were living in Ontario at the time this happened. And my mother remembers the case quite well.
Now, a lot of these cases, these 24 cases that Innocence Canada has achieved exonerations on, are on your website, where people can learn a lot more about it. Pam, what can you tell us? Where can people go to learn more information?
Yeah, definitely. So our website is www.innocencecanada.com, and we have all of our exonerees on our website, so you can read a bit more about them. Yeah.
And if people want to make a donation to the work that you do, because you do rely on charitable donations, can they do that through the website as well?
Yeah, you can reach. Oh, sorry, Ron, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go, Ron. It's okay.
We can definitely be reached through the website. Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for the work that you do. This is really important work for our justice system. It's also fascinating to read about these cases. So I encourage everyone to check out the website and learn more about the really vital work that Innocence Canada does. So thank you both so much for your work and for coming on today to share it with me.
Thank you.
Thank you and your viewers.